So I'm here with James Nestor today. James Nestor is the best-selling author of the book Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art, as well as the book Deep, Freediving, Renegade Science, and What the Ocean Tells Us About Ourselves. His book Breath has just been translated into Danish and comes out tomorrow, which is exciting news for us Danes, as the book explores forgotten knowledge about the importance of our respiration for our physical and psychological health and well-being. Welcome to Denmark, Mr. James Nestor.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
First, I'd like to personally thank you for digging up this ancient wisdom and presenting us with the science of breathing. Your book came into my life at a point when I needed to understand and accept my own malnutrition, and I had to come to a decision for my future health. So I read your book several times, and there's still so much that I need to process and understand. So thank you so much for putting all of this knowledge together in one book.
Thanks for reading it.
I really enjoyed it. So first, I would like to ask you what initially motivated you to write the book Breath, and what kept you going through all those years of writing and research.
It wasn't one thing that inspired me. It was many things. Experiences I had had with breathing, experiences I had had with breathing improperly, chronic breathing issues, and then finding some relief through breathing techniques. But I'm not a memoirist. I don't write those kinds of books. I'm a science journalist, so I didn't know what to do with this subject matter. And so I just thought it was something that I had benefited from until years and years passed, and I kept finding more strange scientific information. And when I met freedivers, these people who have this ability to focus on their breathing so well that they can hold their breath for 6 minutes, 7 minutes at a time, and dive to these incredible depths, I thought, my God, there's something so much deeper and more profound that has to do with breathing. Who would have thought breathing is such this simple thing, and yet we get most of our energy from our breath, not from food and drink. And so how we take that breath in and exhale it, of course, it's going to make a huge difference to our athletic performance, our posture, our ability to think clearly and more. And it seemed like a crazy idea at the beginning. My agent told me so. My editor hated it. And so it was over several months of research and convincing them that I finally figured out that there might be a book in this.
Yeah, I'm really glad you were able to convince them, because this book has so much knowledge that the world needs right at this time, I think. One of the things that you explore in your book are the damages to our health, physical as well as mental health, from mouth breathing. And I know that I had sleep apnea as a child, and I had my tonsils removed when I was 2, which helped me breathe better and speak better at the time. But I wonder what can we learn from your book about the consequences of mouth breathing, sleep apnea?
Well, mouth breathing is something up to 50% of the population does. Kids more than adults, and we view it as something that's normal. And yet you look at nature, you look at animals in the wild, and none of them breathe through their mouths. Dogs will breathe through their mouths to thermoregulate, to offload heat, because they can't sweat. Beyond that, unless you have a pug or bulldog who has been bred to have a face that's so flat, just like human faces, that they can't breathe, and they so happen to have chronic sinusitis and all the problems that we suffer from. Animals in the wild are all obligate nasal breathers. This is the pathway through which we should breathe air. And this is just a message that I had never heard until I started researching this book. I was a mouth breather as a kid. I breathed through my mouth every single night as I slept. I thought this was completely normal. and it's not. And you realize once you look to the science and how the human body is put together, that breathing through the mouth not only can affect the development of how you look, it can affect how you are able to take in that air, how efficiently, and exhale it. And if you're choking every night for a third of your life, of course that's going to have a downstream effect on your body, even how tall you'll grow, like amazing stuff. And this was all news to me. I thought it was outrageous, except for the fact that it was being studied at the top universities and research institutions in the world, and the science was out there, just nobody was reading it.
No, I don't remember anyone ever telling me that I should breathe through my nose. And it wasn't until I asked my parents if I actually had sleep apnea as a child that they told me after I read your book, which is wild. But I heard in another interview that you did that you were talking about this female apnea phenomenon. What's that?
So I talked to Dr. Margaret Chesney. She's at University of California, San Francisco, and she had spent the last couple decades looking at breathing patterns at work and how severely people can be affected by how they breathe when they're in the workplace. And she found that the majority of office workers suffer from something called continuous partial attention syndrome, which is an academic name for email apnea. What that means is, imagine you're sitting at work, you see a bunch of emails coming in, you get stressed out. Our response to that stress is to stop breathing. So that's what we do when we're scared, we stop breathing. So people tend to do this throughout the day. And if you do this enough, and if you do it in a very severe way and hold your breath, and then breathe too much and hold your breath, it can have a lot of the downstream effects on your body and brain as sleep apnea has. So in that it can affect your metabolism, it can affect your neurology, it can affect so many other functions in your body. And if you put someone with sleep apnea, and if that person is suffering from email apnea as well, they're going to be a complete wreck. And if you look at populations, especially in the US, people are so sick, so chronically sick from so many different ailments our ancestors never had. So something's wrong here, and some of those issues are caused by improper breathing. Not all of them, but some of them certainly are.
I noticed my kids, when they're in like deep flow playing or learning, that their breath will become like very deep, very slow, almost like they're in a meditative state. I just think that has, I mean, that's so different from what they do in school and from what we do at work, how we learn, how we play. Everything is like so focused on quick results and quick, we have to be effective, efficient, productive all the time. What does that do to our breathing, and what are maybe the other way around?
Well, those two things tie into one another. So how you breathe is going to affect how your body operates, and how your body operates is going to affect how you breathe. So at the same time, changing your breathing can affect your circulation, your heart rate, how you're able to think about things, your stress levels, your hormone levels. I mean, all the way down to the cellular level. How you breathe is going to affect that. So what's great about breathing is it is a conscious action that we can take, that we can then use to influence and adjust other unconscious actions, such as I can't right now consciously take control of my digestion or my kidney function or my liver function or my heart function, but I can take control of my breathing. And by taking control of my breathing, I can affect all these functions. And you can see this by placing sensors on your heart when you're looking at heart rate variability, looking at blood pressure, and just changing your breathing for a couple of minutes, and you see this transformation taking place. If you're able to take control of your stress and change your body and change your mind within a couple of minutes, have such a reaction, what's going to happen after a couple of days, in a couple of weeks, in a couple of months? How will your body react to that? Well, I've seen it, and people are able to really either reduce or completely reverse a lot of chronic conditions by just focusing on their breath.
Yeah, it's like when you bring your breath deep and like even low, maybe even all the way into your pelvis. It's like settling, and you're better able to feel yourself in your environment.
Absolutely. So there's the biomechanical side and there's the biochemical side. So biochemically, we're able to get a lot more oxygen for less effort. So this state of efficiency is how your body wants to run. Why would you want to overexert to get less? And that's what we do when we are hunching our shoulders up like this, and we have to take so many more breaths just to get oxygen, right? It's like being in a car and just revving the motor all the time at a stop sign wherever you go. Eventually the car is going to break down because you've overdone it. Same is true with our bodies. So biomechanically, it's what allows the lungs to inflate and deflate is the diaphragm, this big muscle that sits underneath the lungs and moves up when we exhale and moves down when we inhale. That diaphragmatic motion also helps move circulation of the blood and lymph fluid. So if you're not engaging your diaphragm, everything just sort of sits still in here, which is what we don't want. And we want things to always be moving in the body, especially fluids. The organs need to be massaged. This is why in yoga there's all these different practices, sticking your stomach out and sucking it in. That is massaging these organs. It helps them purge lymph fluid, and it helps everything run properly. And the main organ, the main muscle that does that is the diaphragm. And you would be so surprised how few people ever really engage their diaphragms to breathe. Something, a lot of the population is engaging 20% of their diaphragmatic motion. It's crazy until you look around and you go walk over to that cafe and watch people just breathing into their chest all day long.
You just mentioned, and from your book we can read that humans have evolved to be poor breathers. We've evolved to have predisposition to breathe through our mouths, and what does this mean?
Yeah, this was pretty shocking stuff. When you're writing a book about breathing, you don't think that you're going to be spending months in labs looking at ancient human skulls and hanging out with dentists, which I did for a couple of years. It's like, what the hell does a dentist have to do with breathing? But it turns out that our faces, our skulls, have changed dramatically in just the last few hundred years. And a lot of people think that's impossible. All you have to do is look at an ancient skull, look at its teeth, and then go and look in the mirror, and I'll show you how much we've changed. All of our ancestors had straight teeth. The idea that a caveman had to pull out wisdom teeth because they were in pain, this is impossible. Does your dog need its wisdom teeth pulled out? Does a monkey need? No, only modern humans are the only species that need to get teeth removed because our mouths are too small for our faces. That's why teeth grow in crooked. When your mouth is too small for your face, you also have a smaller airway. You tend to mouth breathe because that upper palate, I have a very narrow upper palate, a lot of people do, pushes up into the sinus cavities, blocks the nose. And so you default to breathing like this. And the more you breathe like that, the more inflamed your adenoids, tonsils can get, the more irritated your lungs can get, the more you are forced to mouth breathe. So it's really a vicious cycle.
It is a vicious cycle, and I wonder, can we break this? Because you mentioned that through the past generations, our mouths, our skulls have grown smaller and smaller until today about 90% of us have some form of malocclusion.
That's right.
Can we do anything to reverse this? What can we do?
Well, the great thing is about living in this day and age is we have information. And with information, we can take action. Once we realize the core issue of crooked teeth, which a lot of people still don't recognize. They say, oh, it's genetic. I'm like, what the hell does that mean if 200 years ago we all had straight teeth? But the core problem of crooked teeth, it's not a tooth problem. It's a mouth problem. Our teeth are just fine. They don't have room. So if you widen the mouth to the way it was supposed to have been, the teeth then have room to grow in straight. So in this day and age, we have so many different technical interventions we can use to get that mouth to be wider. There's palatal retainers, there's palatal expanders, there's palatal surgery, and all of these different tricks, they all work. There's dozens of these different ways of doing this, but the point is to make that mouth larger, make room for the teeth to grow in straighter, and by doing that, you make the airway larger too. So you improve breathing.
Yeah, so that's like treating the individual who is living, has been the product of generations of faces that have grown smaller. Do you think that there's any hope for like a complete reversing this path, or like going in a different direction?
Absolutely. Will humans do it? Probably not. There's hope for reversing climate change. Will we do it? Probably not.
Yeah.
There's hope for improving the food supply. We know what is healthy food now. We know what is unhealthy food. Will we continue to be choosing unhealthy food in the future? Probably. So it comes down to an individual decision. I'm not here to tell anyone what to do. That's not my job. But I wanted to explore the core issues and then say there is a way out. To me, if we've screwed up our faces so quickly, we can reverse that just as quickly, even quicker than that, because we have different technologies that we had 200 years ago. In a single generation, 50% of a population will develop malocclusion when they switch to industrial foods. So that's what Dr. Robert Corricini found, 50% in a single generation. So if we can make ourselves so sick so quickly, we can improve ourselves just as quickly.
That's what I'm experiencing too, that the body is actually really thankful and willing to improve if we initiate it. It will seek balance, seek perfection,
Anybody knows who's ever changed their diet to have a healthier diet, or started exercising, started doing yoga, started doing more movement, improved their posture, how quickly you improve. Not only in that problem, like with your posture or your diet. You could say, oh, I'm going to change the diet to lose weight. You'll lose weight, but not only will you lose weight, you'll think more clearly, your skin will be more clear, you'll feel better, your digestion will be better. So this is all of these different interventions we've been doing are just bringing the body into balance. And breathing is the quickest way of doing that. Other things are important. Sleep's important, food's important, exercise is important. Of course they are. But the quickest way of balancing your stress levels is breathing, period. Quicker than medications, quicker than anything else.
Can we talk a little bit about breastfeeding? I know you mentioned this in your book, and in Denmark, only about 11% of children are fully breastfed at 6 months, which is the minimum time that's recommended by health authorities, global and national health authorities. And I know when I was breastfeeding my children, I had twins, and my doctor was concerned for my health and thought that I should wean them off when they were about 12 months. But I just wonder, what are the consequences of us not breastfeeding our children for years like they used to?
It's always fascinating to me when modern science thinks we can outwit nature and evolution. Like this idea that oh, we're supposed to be doing this for this. Well, how did our ancestors survive? That doesn't make any sense. So I want to be clear. I'm a dude. I will never breastfeed anything. The last thing I'm going to do is lecture anybody about breastfeed. That is the last thing I will ever do. The only thing I can offer you is information I've learned from experts in the field who have done studies and looked at the difference that breastfeeding will have on facial structure, on airway health, on the straightness of your teeth when you're older. Obviously, the longer someone would breastfeed, the more you're going to be building up the skeleton, the musculature of the face, the more outward that face is going to grow to that attractive prognathic face, right? With that, the mouth is going to grow larger, larger airways, larger mouth, straighter teeth. So to me, it's especially when a kid is developing so quickly and their bones are very malleable, right? Very, very soft at that age. The inputs you put into this kid is they're going to respond to that. So this is not an indictment of anyone who is bottle feeding. I was bottle fed I think my mom breastfed me at 6 months. She's like, nobody was doing that for 6 months back in the day. Like everybody was on formula and bottle feeding. So to me, that makes perfect sense. The more exercise, and breastfeeding causes the face to grow outward. But equally as important as breastfeeding is to have infants wean on real food, to not just go to can of applesauce and can of mushed peas and a can of carrots and a can of dried stuff put with water. I mean, the idea that people are now saying it's unhealthy or unadvisable to wean a kid onto regular food. What the heck did humans do for the past 2.5 million years? There was not Gerber's baby food soft carrots 200 years ago. And there's a reason why we all have crooked teeth and our faces are pretty much deformed and our airways are smaller and our sinus cavities are smaller today. And there's a reason why all our ancestors who weren't eating this food, they all had huge sinus cavities, huge mouths, huge airways. This is why. So
chewing real food.
Chewing real food, and it's not like you can say, oh, okay, I'm now going to go chew, in middle age. This is something that has to be a part of your lifestyle. And it doesn't need to be complex. So modern humans do a really good job of making the simplest things very complex. But this is just eating real food. Again, the closer you get to nature, the body comes into balance. You're just doing what we have evolved to do and evolved to respond to, which is to go from breastfeeding for a couple years. In some cultures, we're breastfeeding for 4 years, right? And then going straight to real food, which causes you got to really chew, especially if you're a young kid. That's scary for a lot of people because they said, oh, the kids are going to choke. Then why didn't all of our ancestors choke to death? Yeah. It's just, this is not my theory. It's not my hypothesis. This is clearly documented by so many experts in the field. And it makes perfect sense, too, once you start thinking about it.
Yeah, I remember having such fear that my children would choke if I gave them a carrot, like a whole carrot. That was just too scary for me. I would cut it, slice it, whatever, smaller pieces. But I was really happy when I realized that I was doing something right by breastfeeding my children for a long time, even though there's a lot of cultural barriers and a lot of actually social stigma to breastfeeding for a long time. At the same time, there's a lot of stigma, as you just pointed out, that you don't want to make anyone feel bad about not being able to breastfeed, because a lot of people actually would like to breastfeed their children, and for some reason they can't, and work and all these obligations that we have.
There's so many pressures on people living in the industrial world, from work, breastfeeding every 2 hours. Like, what's time for that? Especially if a mom is working. I totally get it. So it's not the end of the world if a kid is on a bottle early, but you will have to make adjustments in order to allow that development to really take place to the diet, and not feed the kid just all this soft modern food. Again, this is not a lecture from me. I learned a lot of this from Dr. Mariana Evans and Dr. Kevin Boyd. They're the leaders in the field. There's a book called Baby-Led Weaning, which is supposed to be a very good book. I've read it for people to get more advice on that. But it's allowing the face to develop properly, and we have not allowed ourselves to do that. I'm a perfect example of this. I ate just modern, processed, canned crap. This was all anybody was eating when I was growing up. There was nobody that had a garden that was eating raw veg. That was unheard of. And you see what happens because of that, how people develop and respond to it.
Yeah, there's really, who has time to garden as well? We're so busy. People are stressed, and they have anxiety and depression, and they're exhausted. I came across this quote from the poet David White, and he, in a conversation with Brother David, was told that the antidote to exhaustion is not necessarily rest, but wholeheartedness. And I thought, wholeheartedness, what does this mean, and how do you live more wholeheartedly or with more wholeheartedness? And can breathing, do you think breathing can help us here?
I guess it depends on what your definition of wholeheartedness is. Does that mean to really throw yourself into everything that you do, to feel it emotionally? I'm not sure. I know that breathing is a pillar of health. It would be impossible, this is my belief, that you could ever really be healthy if your breathing isn't healthy. What I mean by that is you can exercise, you can eat all the right stuff, you can go to sleep and try to sleep 8 hours a night, but if you're not breathing well, you're never ever going to be well. And you see this time and time again. So many people who are corporate go-getters, who are triathletes, who are at the top of the food chain in their work, and they are chronically ill, and there's something wrong with them, and they can't figure it out. They pop another pill and they take another supplement, and still things are off. And it's their breathing that has been so dysfunctional for so long, and it's finally catching up to them. And that's what a lot of these clinicians I've talked to keep seeing over and over again.
Yeah, the stress and the speed and the way that we live is so rushed. I just wonder if I was looking at this at the health authorities' recommendations for what can you do if you're really stressed, and they of course mention sleep, and they mention exercise and better time management, etc. But they don't really mention breathing, except that breathing shallowly is a symptom of stress. Why? What would happen if breath would be taken as like a more preventative? If the doctors would tell us a little bit more about the effects of breathing.
Well, breathing isn't going to cure everything for everyone, and whoever tells you that is wrong, right? But it's free. It is the quickest way of taking control of your stress. It's the quickest way of resetting your body and your brain, and it's the quickest way of allowing yourself to take a little rest. And what's great about it is you can do it anywhere at any time, because we carry our breath around with us our entire lives. So this doesn't require putting on special yoga pants and sitting in a room and staring at the wall. It's something you can do writing email or driving in your car. And it's interesting that someone would say that breathing rapidly is just a symptom of stress, because we absolutely know it elicits a stress response. And stress is a generalized response. So no matter if we're suffering from emotional stress or physical stress, or we get hurt or whatever, we have the same stress response. And a lot of us aren't getting hurt in the battlefield anymore, but we are in this constant state of panic, which causes us to be very extremely stressed out and elicits that same reaction. So breathing is the quickest way of changing that, of resetting that.
In your book, you mentioned the effects of the anatomy of breathing and the role of carbon dioxide in managing anxiety, for example. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure.
What you've learned?
Yeah, it gets so counterintuitive that it took me a long time to really understand this. But if you are constantly over breathing, you are getting less oxygen and less circulation. How does that make sense? And I'll show you how it makes sense. If you take 20 or 30 very deep, very full, heavy breaths, you'll notice you'll feel a little spaced out, or maybe your toes or hands will get a little tingly. That is from a lack of circulation going to those areas, because you've breathed out too much carbon dioxide. And without having a balance of carbon dioxide, you aren't going to have proper circulation. What happens is the blood vessels start to constrict. You need carbon dioxide in order to allow blood to flow, and you need blood flow in order for oxygen to be delivered to all the hungry cells in our body. Blood doesn't do much good if it's just in our bloodstreams, right? And people could say, oh, my blood sats are up to 99%. That's what's in your bloodstream, right? And that's great. But that oxygen in your bloodstream isn't creating energy for you. The energy is only created in the cells and mitochondria. So you have to get that oxygen from the bloodstream into the cells, and you need carbon dioxide to do that. And carbon dioxide has a terrible reputation because we only think about it in terms of climate change. There's too much CO2 in the atmosphere. Humans cause that. This is all true. And if you think otherwise, you're not able to look at the simplest science here. This is true, but we need a balance of CO2 and oxygen in our bodies for it to function properly. And we've known this for more than 120 years. The science is very clear, and yet still people are constantly over-breathing.
In my classes, sometimes people, I tell them that try breathing through your nose. Try nose breathing, and try extending your exhalation. And sometimes they'll ask me why, and I sometimes have a difficult time trying to explain to them the complexity of this. What could I tell people about nose breathing and extending your...
You could explain to them that the nose is this wondrous organ. It participates in 30 different functions in the body. It helps to clean the air that we take in. If you breathe through your mouth, it's very easy, right? And people say, well, it's easier to breathe through the mouth. That's a good thing. That air is coming in too fast for us to properly utilize it. We can still breathe this way. We can get oxygen in past our lungs into our bloodstream this way, but it's not an efficient way of doing it. You want that pressure, okay? You want the resistance. You want the filtration of the nose. You want the moisture and the heating that comes with nasal breathing. The mouth doesn't serve any of those functions. And you can mention to people that you'll get about 20% more oxygen breathing through the nose than you will equivalent breaths through the mouth. And if you think that 20% isn't going to have a difference day and night in your abilities to operate, you're crazy. It makes a huge difference. Again, the science has been out there. It's documented, and yet you still see such a large percentage of the population mouth breathing.
And that's because you're slowing the breath down.
Because not only are you slowing it down, as you're pressurizing it, that pressure allows that oxygen to better push through the alveoli and then into the bloodstream, okay? You're also not offloading too much carbon dioxide. So by slowing the breathing down, you're keeping the CO2 in balance, which opens up those blood vessels. In addition to that, you are releasing a lot more nitric oxide in the sinus passages. And this is this amazing molecule that plays an essential role in oxygen delivery and vasodilation. So I had mentioned this before in just the last interview I did, but the drugs that are used for erectile dysfunction, sexual dysfunction, all of these drugs work by releasing nitric oxide. That's how they work in the body. We can release our own nitric oxide 6 times more, one study found at the Karolinska Institute, by just breathing through the nose. So nitric oxide is also so important in COVID times because it interacts directly with viruses. It kills pathogens. We don't get that when we're breathing through the mouth. And even if you're wearing a mask and you think you're protecting and you're breathing through the mouth, you're not. You need to breathe through your nose with that mask on. So important.
I'll return to that just in one moment, but I just want to ask you about humming. There's you mentioned also humming is a good way to release nitric oxide, right?
You get 15 times more nitric oxide breathing through the nose, and that and humming. And that research was done by John Lundgren at Karolinska Institute in Sweden. And there's a reason why when people hum, they have noticed that they tend to be less congested, okay? Because that nitric oxide helps open up the sinus passages. And there's also a reason why in yoga and other traditions, there's a lot of humming, or even doing om. That is humming right there. And to think you get 15 times more nitric oxide doing that is interesting. And to also think that the ancients have known about this, have obviously felt how effective this was, which is why these traditions are still around today.
I noticed that my kids hum a lot, and
That's great.
Yeah, and it sort of comes natural to them, but at some point it stops. Like we don't really practice it anymore in general, right?
We become self-conscious.
Yeah.
We don't want to be looked at as a weirdo, you know. When if you're in a crowded place, you're probably annoying people with your humming, and but if you're out walking alone and no one's around to annoy, then it can be very beneficial. There was one really weird study I read about somebody who had chronic sinusitis and hummed 4 times a day for I think it was like 5 or 6 minutes a day, and was able to, and this was measured, he was able to get rid of the infection in his nose by humming. And this is a study that will never be funded, but how fascinating to get 100 people and just to see what kind of difference it would make. But again, there's no money to be made on this, so I don't know who would support that research.
And you can't have a classroom full of kids that are humming all day.
No, but you can sing songs and have chants, and
That's
if
true.
you think of Buddhist mantras, if you think there is humming involved in all these things, and there's a lot of Ujjayi breathing where you create that vibration in the back of the throat, which stimulates the vagus nerve, which then stimulates this parasympathetic response. So we live in this age where we have these machines that can actually measure what's actually happening in the brain and in the body. So we don't have to rely on, do you feel better? Okay, well then I guess this is working. There's no more guesswork now. We can see it in real time. And a lot of these wearables people have on the wrists or rings can show you how just changing your breathing can affect your heart rate, your blood pressure, and more. And it's not a subtle difference that it makes.
No. So that's a really good idea. We should have more chanting and humming in schools and at work. I think that would be great. One of my favorite quotes from your book is, "To breathe is to absorb ourselves and what surrounds us, to take in little bits of life, understand them, and give pieces of ourselves back out. Respiration is, at its core, reciprocation." This
Unfortunately, in COVID times,
Yeah, that's what I was
this was written years before COVID came about. But I guess it's for better or for worse. It is reciprocation. That's what it is.
But it really deeply resonated with me, and I was reading this book during COVID, as we all were. But I wonder, how this idea is faring now. That
Well, it's interesting writing this book about breathing, researching it for so long, talking to my friends, a lot of whom are journalists and writers. They said, "This book is stupid. Who's going to read this? Why are you?" And then I told them a little more. They're like, "I guess that's interesting, but not really." And then who knew that the book was entirely printed, the delivery date in publishing, the book is done a year before it comes out, right? So it was printed in a warehouse in February of 2020, right? COVID comes in March. People are like, "Oh, this isn't really serious." Things start shutting down. People are like, "Whoa."
Yes.
April comes around. So what is going on here? The book came out in May. So someone said right when the book came out, they said, "Oh, very entrepreneurial person put together this book real quick." How is that possible? It was literally printed and in catalogs that it was coming out in October of 2019. So, breathing is reciprocation. And COVID is very clearly showing us the good parts and the bad parts. But beyond the disease and spreading of the disease, to me, it is the most intimate of the senses. It's the most intimate act, because you're not just processing frequencies of light or processing frequencies of sound or touch, but you're literally taking in the world. You don't have to think about it like in a crowded train station, but when you're in nature, you're taking in what is out there, the oxygen that's been produced by these plants and these trees and whatever else is out there, taking into your body and then giving back out from what, and that's this beautiful cycle. You bring back out carbon dioxide, which plants and animals need, and not animals, plants and trees need. And I read this one study, it didn't make it into the book, but it's how the entire planet is in perfect balance, that the exact amount of oxygen that's coming out is the exact amount of oxygen all the animals need. The exact amount of CO2 that is coming out of these animals is the exact amount of CO2. So everything's in this perfect balance. Like, it hasn't been moving around until industrialization comes around, or until a catastrophe happens, and then it will change. But it's like the whole planet is breathing in synchrony. All the animals have their role. You're giving out CO2, you're giving out oxygen. What a beautiful thing to think about.
Yeah, I just think that idea is so beautiful. It deeply touched me, and I keep returning to this. I also I want to mention David White again, because he actually mentioned your book and recommended it on his recent series, 3 Sundays series, and he said that to not breathe in fully is also to not really accept that you are here as a being, and that if you're constantly worried about like your environment and as if that you could catch some kind of disease from your environment, that is also going to have like a really negative effect on your being. I wonder if you have any thoughts on this?
Oh, that's a great point. And you think about how we started adopting these unhealthy breathing habits, right? When we started moving into cities, and cities were really stinky, and they were full of diseases, and they were full of dust, and they were full of mold. So you move into these cities, and you don't want to take a deep breath. So you start putting things over your face and breathing like this, taking these very shallow breaths. Along with that, you're wearing a corset, or you're wearing a really tight-fitting vest, and you can't even take a deep breath if you wanted to. Add to that sitting down like this for 8 hours a day, and then sitting down like this some more. And this is just part of the reason why we become the worst breathers in the animal kingdom. You don't see dogs sitting like this, right? When they're sleeping, their bellies are, it's a beautiful, same thing with the infants, same thing with any animal in the wild. They breathe, they're so connected. And I think you're right with this holding your breath in. You see this with people with fear-based disorders, from anxiety, panic, anorexia, agoraphobia, and more. It's threatening to them to open up and take that deep breath because they're so closed in. And I think that that's a very perceptive way of viewing our relationship with our breath. I think it's a very clear sign of even someone's mental state if they're able to let go, relax their shoulders, and take a very deep, soft breath in, and be comfortable enough to do that. Be comfortable enough in their body and in the perception of other people around them to be able to express themselves like that. And again, I've talked to a lot of psychologists, a lot of psychiatrists who see this with their patients, and once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. People are just all the time, and it's killing us. It's bad news.
Yeah, so if you're breathing into your body, you have to feel it. You feel it, you experience this because it's very physical, and then you get to experience your physical being and maybe deal with something that's locked in there somewhere, some trauma, grief, or stress, anxiety.
I think that's why breath work is so effective for people with fear-based disorders, for people with other psychological or mental hang-ups. And I've seen people absolutely transform. Breathwork did for them what nothing else was able to do, even after decades of being on drugs. And the work of Dr. James Eierman, who has done a lot of work with holotropic breathwork. He led 12,000 people over the course of a decade and said this was more effective for people with serious problems, schizophrenia and more, than addiction problems, than any other intervention, because it not only allows you to loosen up, but allows you to very intimately connect with your breathing, and by doing that, to open up and to gain this freedom that you're not able to get otherwise. A lot of body work does this as well. Dance can do it, movement can do it, where people just start feeling in a completely different way that they've been divorced from for so long. And what a wonderful thing. It doesn't take much to do this. I want to urge people, if you have these issues, don't do this alone at home. You do this with a therapist who really knows what they're doing. And the science is very clear. It's so effective. There's a recent study that just came out through Yale University of looking at how effective this was for anxiety disorders. Just breathing for 20 minutes a day.
But you put yourself sort of in a vulnerable position because you're faced with yourself. You're face to face with your own being.
Yeah, it is. It's very vulnerable, especially with people who are really self-conscious of the way they're perceived by other people, which is why I think it's important to do this with someone you're comfortable with, and maybe just do it with one other person who is experienced in doing this, and then you can join a group setting. And some of those group settings get a little out of hand, and I wonder how much is really happening on a deeper level versus how much some people are maybe a little too free with their breathing, and it feels a little like they're showing off a little bit, which is why I would recommend a smaller setting, controlled setting, and you'll see how effective it is.
I'd like to talk to you about the connection between your book Deep and this book Breath that's just being translated to Danish. What can we learn about humans and our connection to the environment by going deep into ourselves, and how can we use this information to live better individually and collectively?
I think that by going deep into ourselves is just reconnecting into what we are supposed to be doing on this planet, what we have really adapted to and what we've evolved to do. And so deep, the book was looking at the human connection to the ocean. Really love the ocean and the surfer and diver and all that. And I wanted to know what was the real connection, not just chemically, because our blood contains a lot of the same minerals and salt content as seawater, all that, but other elements of how we're connected from the surface to the very bottom of the deepest sea. So once you start understanding that we came from the ocean, which is why 70% of the world's population is very close to the ocean, because we feel this connection to it, like we're going home when we return to the ocean, we're immersed in the water. Then you want to start, or at least I wanted to start to explore that on different levels and explore that. Well, what's it like on the terrestrial plane? We've been on, on land for a long time now, since we were in the ocean, few billion years. And so how else are we connected to the earth now? And what can it do for us if we reconnect with it? So nothing in this book is new. It's a new science, because people are now studying it and measuring it in a real way, and there's thousands of studies, but I called it a lost art, because we had known about it for thousands and thousands of years. And how ironic that modern industrial humans are just rediscovering this stuff and saying, wow, it actually does work. Of course it works. There's a reason it's been around for so long. And the science is confirming that. No one would believe it if you can't hook yourself up to a machine and show it.
In Deep, you talk to a lot of free divers, and you experience free diving yourself. I wonder if, like the free divers, that the breath work has allowed you to tap into this almost superhuman power.
Not me. It's allowed other people to tap into a superhuman power. We can all be superhuman. I really believe that. And I don't like the word superhuman. I like the word human. We can all be more human, because these are not some sort of magical abilities. These are all within our capabilities. And in Deep, looking at how the body responds to water, the deeper we go in the ocean, the more like a fish we become, not just psychologically, but different mechanisms, mammalian dive reflexes start kicking in, slow the heart rate, shifting blood around, slow our consciousness down. And so we literally become more like an ocean animal. But we can become more human by reconnecting with nature. This doesn't necessarily mean you have to move out into a shack and live alone with no electricity. We're of this world now, of the modern world, but that still doesn't mean we can't adopt some simple habits to reincorporate how we're supposed to naturally live. How are we supposed to sit up? How are we supposed to stand? How are we supposed to walk? How are we supposed to breathe? How are we supposed to eat? And I know I mentioned this, but this is not very complicated stuff. You look to nature as your guide, and then adopt the most simple principles, and you just watch your body get back into balance.
Yeah, so again, the body has so much more potential than we let it express. And
well, I think that we used to be seeing this potential all the time, and showing it to one another. But I would think that diving to a depth of 120, 130 meters on a single breath of air seems impossible, right? Until you see it. And until you see these people doing this every day, you would think that it's impossible to sit in the snow for 8 hours at a time and just use your breathing to melt a circle in snow. That's scientifically impossible. Until you look at the science, until you see videotape recorded by Harvard Medical School of people doing this. You'd think it's impossible to access your nervous system to fight off the endotoxin version of E. coli. This is supposed to be medically impossible. Wim Hof did it, and a bunch of other people have done it too. So it's only impossible until someone does it, and then people say, oh, these people are just weird, until you do it yourself and you realize that you're just as able to do this as anyone else. So why on earth wouldn't you? Why on earth? You don't have to melt a circle around you in the snow for 8 hours at a time, but you can use your breathing to heat your body up. It's a very easy thing to do, and I think a few years ago people would have thought this was just some new age quackery until the science comes out, and then it rewrites biology books, and which I think is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it's great that you've gathered so much science of this lost art in this book, and I can't imagine how complicated it must have been to.
It was awful. It was an awful process.
But it's such a great result. In both your books, you explore energy and electric energy in the body. What have you learned about this energy, moving the energy in the body, prana, chi, or whatever we want to call it? What can we learn?
Well, all the energy we get is from this movement of electrons specifically. And how do we get those electrons? We can soak some of it up from the earth, we get it from oxygen, we get it from glucose, and so it seems like at the subatomic level, that's how everything is controlled, not just in our body, but in everything around us. Things that are hard don't have a lot of flow of electrons, right? And things that are soft or more alive tend to. And so what an interesting concept. This is the first I ever heard about it. When I was researching this, I said, oh, that's why a rock is hard, and that's why lava isn't. You can heat up a rock, bring it energy, releases those electrons. So I think that at the core of everything, the core of breathing is energy. Breathing is it's allowing you to access this energy, and that energy is produced in mitochondria, and it comes out as ATP, and we know all that, the biochemical reactions of it, but that's really at the core. And when you're talking about healing, it's about moving around energy or balancing energy. This is acupuncture, this is yoga, this is acupressure, this is dance, and that's at the core is what so many modern interventions are doing. We just don't call it those things. We call it a pill, or we call it a surgery, or we call it something else, but a lot of it is moving around energy to balance the body. And that doesn't have to be a woo-woo new age concept at all. It comes down to the basic tenets of how life works, of how life is animated, and how to keep it animated for a long time, which is what we want. We want to not just live long, but we want to be healthy for a long time. At least most people do.
Yeah, you mentioned also that humans tend to rust, but that we don't call it rust, but we call it cancer, for example.
When cells go rogue, that's what can happen. And it's interesting looking at research in which some researchers were saying that cancer will really proliferate and really start spreading in areas of low oxygen. So same way that metals will degrade, they become oxidized, a lot of free radicals, our bodies do the same thing, and cancer is one of the ways that they can degrade very quickly. And so I thought that when I found that research, I thought, oh, that makes perfect sense, that cancer is like a rust, and chemically, and the real specifics of the physics here get really complicated, but it's the same general thing is happening. And this was the research of Albert Svent-Györgyi, who was a Hungarian researcher, won the Nobel Prize, spent decades studying how cancer really works, what's really causing it, what are the mechanisms behind it. And I think he was so far ahead of his time, and we're still catching up to this guy's research that he was doing in the 50s and 60s and 70s.
Yeah, I heard it. I watched an interview with Tom Myers, who wrote the book Anatomy Trains, all about fascia.
Yeah.
And he said that he thinks that cancer is like a disease of forgetting, and that if we tend to forget about an area in our body or overuse some areas of the body, that sort of like what you're explaining will tend to rust the body. But he calls it a disease of forgetting. And I just wonder if you think that remembering, like practice of like remembering ourselves and moving energy into parts of our body that we have overlooked or misused can help us live better, healthier.
I think that idea of forgetting is really interesting. The work of David Sinclair, who wrote a book called Lifespan. He's at Harvard, has a lab at Harvard. I was lucky enough to talk with him a couple of weeks ago. And what happens with cancer, my understanding of this is very sketchy, but just on the outside, the way I understand it is your different structures in your cells stop communicating in the way that they're supposed to. There are problems within the cells that they can't do what they're naturally supposed to do and replicate in a way that is consistent. So it's a communication problem. And what is forgetting something more than just a communication problem, right? That's what it is. And so that's a lot of Sinclair's work is based on this. It's how do you keep the communication between all of these different organs and the cells functioning in the right way? And that communication is done through chemicals, but it ultimately comes down to electricity. It comes down to energy. I mean, that's what it is. There's chemical energy, and there's other energy that's elicited through oxygen and other charges and grounding and electrons you get from elsewhere. But and again, this is not my area of expertise, far from it, but I really like that concept. It sounds like there are different ways of forgetting. There's ways of your cells forgetting what to do, becoming detached from that. That's what happens when we get older, right? Those different structures start degrading in a way that they're not quite able to remember how to replicate as perfectly as they were when we were younger. And then if you scale that up to a larger level, I could see that forgetting about movement or forgetting about one area of your body and allowing that lack of energy, that lack of circulation, that lack of lymph fluid movement, that area would then be susceptible to injury. And it could possibly be, I don't know for sure, but why does cancer grow in certain areas in the body and not in others all the time? And my understanding of that is a lot of it is due to chronic stress. And what happens with chronic stress is less essential organs get cut off to the energy they need to be able to function normally. And that is something that Dr. Stephen Park had mentioned to me 4 or 5 years ago. So, whoa. And his hypothesis, this isn't even his theory, is that there's a reason why most cancers start in organs that are cut off during states of stress. And
So interesting.
and coincidentally, perhaps these organs are also the most susceptible to cancer because it's an energy problem. It goes back to forgetting. So really interesting concept. I'm just riffing right now. I've never thought about this before, but I think it's
that I will definitely look up those sources that you've mentioned, because I think it's really interesting, especially in my work too, with awakening different parts of the body. And in my own practice, I have experienced that I've been able to help myself get rid of pain and heal from an injury by directing my mind into that place in the body and my breath into that place in the body. It's taken years, and I'm still working on it. You know, it's a process, but it really makes a lot of sense that if we remember ourselves, we can actually feel better and live more healthy.
I think you're absolutely right with that, and there's nothing sketchy about that, because you're directing your consciousness to a certain area, and if you're good enough at this, you can direct more blood flow to this area, and that could elicit better healing. On an extreme version is Swami Rama, who was able to take his hand and change the temperature between his thumb and his pinky by 11 degrees Fahrenheit, and you could see it with one area was gray and lacking in blood flow, the other was bright red and pink. And this was measured, so if this guy's a real expert, probably very few people are able to do this today, but if you can do that on that level, then even increasing blood flow by 1% or 2%, we know that for prehabilitation, for people with surgery and rehabilitation, focusing your mind on that area, there seems to be something that it elicits something, a physiological response to deliver more energy. What is blood flow but energy?
Yeah, I'll tell, and I see it in my classes. I'll tell people when they're lying on their mats, and I'll tell them just feel all of your toes softly touching the mat, and I see them moving their minds into their toes, and they'll start moving their toes, adjusting and feeling, and it's like so wild that the mind can go so quickly into being in the body, and like that, with that comes energy into that body, into that part of the body, and I just love that. It makes me like love my job. Yeah, it's so wild.
For seniors, I had heard this from my mom, that it's been shown to be really effective to just, we become so disconnected to our bodies as we go through life, but just focus all your attention to your pinky toe and then the toe right next to it. And people are like, I haven't thought of this in 40 years. And then your middle toe, and just try to move that middle toe. And so by reestablishing these neuro connections in your brain, which have become atrophied because you haven't needed them, you can then start establishing a deeper helping you remember these connections to your toes, and then do the same thing with your fingers and other areas of your body. And to me, it makes perfect sense, because you haven't needed to do that. You can still get through life, but compensation is different than health. So you can still run if you have broken ankles, but you're not going to run very well. And so why not be able to be in that constant conversation with your body and listen to it? It seems to make perfect sense to me.
Yeah, and I think people really enjoy it, experiencing their own bodies more fully, and being more present. Right. I use touch a lot too, having people touch different parts of themselves, and directing energy and breathing to that part of the body. How have you in your own experience, how has your practice evolved since you wrote the book Breath?
Well, I'm a journalist. I'm not a breathing therapist or a clinician, and so I do not try to profess that I am a teacher of any of this stuff. I'm just a filter. I go out and find the information. I talk to the teachers. I talk to the clinicians. I talk to the leaders in the field, but I am not someone that will ever be on a stage and teaching people. Other people are much more qualified to do that. Having said that, of course I picked up some of these tricks and used them in my life. You can't see people so transformed by this stuff and not want to include it in your own life. And that's one of the reasons I got interested in writing this book. I saw how powerful breathing could be. Nobody I knew, none of the doctors or researchers I knew could describe what happened. I said, I sat in this class and my legs were crossed and the room was really cold, and I breathed in just this simple pattern, and I was just absolutely pouring in. Doesn't make any sense from our traditional understanding, and they didn't think it was possible. Everyone there saw it. I certainly felt it. So having experienced that, of course I've incorporated these things. I try to wake up and breathe for about 15-20 minutes. I really like active Kundalini breathing. I like the intense stuff. I like to feel what it does to my body. I like that charge. At night, I try to do some breathing if I'm good. I didn't do it the last couple of days. I've been too tired, but I'll pick it up tonight. And to calm my body down and relax it. And as I was laying awake staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m. yesterday, because it was 6 p.m. where I'm from, I used breathing to just said, at least if I'm going to be here, I want to be very relaxed and not frustrated about it. Before you know it, I was sound asleep. So again, I'm not going to say that I'm the professional at this. I'm not going to say that I do this all day long and study it all the time, but the simplest breathing techniques I've found to be the most effective. They don't need to be these 24 different steps of breathing. Put your hands in these certain ways, and you can do that if you want, but it's just the simple ones are the best ones for me, at least.
Yeah, I find that really is, the simple, and the simpler, the easier it is to actually do it in your everyday life as well, right? So just remembering to exhale and
yeah. But you'd be surprised how few people do this. When you ask them to, I'm sure you see this. It's like, take a big exhale. People are like, they feel scared, especially people with panic and anxieties. It's so sad that we're that divorced from the most basic thing we do 25,000 times a day, that we've forgotten how to do that. But how wonderful to be reconnected, to remember that, and to see what a difference it makes to your body.
It truly does. Okay, so I think we'll start to wrap things up here. But I would like to know, because I'm just really curious, what are your future research plans? Are there any ancient lost arts practices that we can expect?
Well, it's taboo to talk about these things too early, but I'm very excited to be here in Europe for a couple of months. I'm doing a lot of promo, but I also made sure I had at least a week off between each of these stops to refocus on research and to start exploring some other subjects. I do have an idea for a new book, and I've spent so much of the last year and a half now, 16 months, on this side of the microphone, which is great. I feel so privileged to be able to do this, but I really like your job. I really prefer to sit over there and listen and learn and get excited about where this research can take me. A day does not go by that I'm not very grateful for the job I have, which is to be curious about the world, and now to be in a position where I can pursue some really weird lines of research. It's so thrilling, and I'm really excited to shut my mouth and start listening more. So.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I look forward to what comes out of your research when it comes out. Is there anything that you'd like to add to this conversation that I haven't asked you about, that you would like the Danes to know about the book or about you?
No, I think we covered most of it, beyond the fact that, nature is simple yet subtle. So don't overthink it, don't overdo it, don't overcomplicate it. Stick with the simple stuff, and I think you'll be surprised by how far that can take you.
So thank you so much, James Nestor, for taking the time to talk to me. I'm really honored to be here talking to you, and for you sharing your time with me. I'm truly grateful. And thanks for coming to Denmark and for sharing your work with the world.
Thank you for having me. What a wonderful place. I look forward to exploring it over the next week and a half. Great.
Before we end, where can people learn more about you, your work?
My website at Mr. James Nestor, that's NESTOR.com, has all of the scientific references from the book. I knew nobody would believe this stuff, so my publisher allowed me to put all 400 scientific references. There are interviews with professors at Harvard, leaders in breathing. All of it's free. Anyone can access it at any time. And I'm also trying to get better at social media stuff. So at Mr. James Nestor on Instagram, I'm not posting puppy pictures, even though puppy pictures are great on social media. I'm just trying to stick with research, things that can help people, small little interviews with breathing experts and other experts in the field. So.
Great, thanks. So I recommend everyone to go check out Mr. James Nestor online and to get the book Breath, which comes out tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.